gives me immense pleasure to be among the physiotherapists, the ones whom I have ever admired during my career as a student and then as a teacher. We welcome our honorable guests who are going to give us a lot. And these are very rare opportunities when you have masters in the field to be so freely available that we can discuss our issues, listen to the advice, what they give us, and then we can follow some of them. Now, as I learned today, the physiotherapist probably is the most wanted, not wanted like the villains of the films, but the most wanted people, whatever age we are. And as age is advancing and the age by numbers is increasing, you will be required everywhere. There will be no house where you will not be seen. Now, as I am also advancing in my age, my knees have started hurting. If I unfortunately consult an orthopedic surgeon, after my MRI, next answer will be, let's change your joints. And I tell you, it's not that good experience as many people might have had. But maybe my physiotherapist, without hurting my joint, sets it back, not as young it was at 30 years of age, but maybe what it was around 55 or 60 years of age. So now you can see your importance. And this is going to rise every day. You might feel sometimes that, okay, why I didn't become a surgeon or a physician or an anesthetist or a gynecologist. They are probably, maybe they scored a little better in my 10+2, hence they chose those courses. I can surely tell that as a surgeon, you can be popular because you operate people who are dying. You give life sometimes, you can be popular. But today, living with pain, living with deformity is worse than a death. So a person who is dying, he is dead, he is no more, job is over. But your person is not dying, he is on earth, he is crying with pain all the time. Medicines don't help, they have their own toxic effects, and ultimate surgery. And surgery, you also know, is not successful in many other places. We know about low backache. You get anything done, ultimately you are the ones who treat. So your job is very important. And there are colossal opportunities as time is coming ahead, be it India or be it any other country. Unfortunately, in our country, so far, the physiotherapists are kept little at a lower ebb compared with a surgeon or a physician. But I know abroad, you are the costliest people. Your fees is much higher than the fees of a surgeon. Of course, he charges one time, you charge, slow. Like in Burz's disease of the lower limb, where there is decreased vascularity to the foot, it's very painful, walk at a stretch some kilometers. It is said that either you forgot the word, chopping, amputation above the knee in one go, or you chop first the toes, then forefoot, then above the ankle, then just below the knee, and ultimately above the knee. So best is we chop in one go instead of chopping time. Surgeons chop in one go, but you also nibble a little bit time and again. But ultimately your fees, your earning is much more, and you will be remembered for a very long time because your contact with that patient is very long. Surgeons contact will be 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, and after that it's over. So you are very important people. Always remember, you are very important people, and you joined a beautiful course. And here we have tops in the field to guide you and to help you and also explain to you what sort of opportunities are there abroad. Probably you may not be thinking that big in India, but abroad you will be very big. Thank you very much, and thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's about time I let you know about IFAN Global, USA, and of course, Miss Cyndi Peters. IFAN Global India Private Limited is a subsidiary of IFAN Inc., a US-based company in the business of training healthcare professionals for overseas placement. IFAN Global is in process of physiotherapy licensing and credentialing for United States. They have a long history of placing foreign trained physiotherapists in the United States. They offer services including program, consultation, and employment sponsorship opportunities. IFAN Global works with US employers who filed for H-1B visas for NPTE passed physiotherapists. Ms. Cyndi Peters is heading the US staffing department as a manager at IFAN Global USA. She has more than 10 years of experience recruiting foreign-trained healthcare professionals for the US. Ms. Cyndi Peters will guide you through the steps required to qualify and sit for the licensing exams. Without further ado, I now hand over the dais to Ms. Cyndi Peters. Kindly grace the dais, ma'am.
IFAN was established in 2001. We have offices located in the US, where I'm from. We also have a partner in the Philippines. The Philippines is very commonly known to produce healthcare workers to export to countries around the world, including the United States. And of course, we have an office here in India. We are an industry leader in providing not only recruitment, but also training and placement opportunities. In IFAN's career, in IFAN's history, we've placed over 8,000 professionals throughout the world, but 1,000 of those alone have been to the United States. In my personal career, I've placed over 2,500 candidates into the US. We are healthcare experts. We work in healthcare pretty much exclusively. I work with physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, as well as registered nurses. We provide a consultancy program. We will help guide you through the credentialing requirements and deficient coursework necessary to qualify for these export opportunities. The licensure by examination based on your profession. So for physical therapy, it's the NPTE. For occupational therapy, it's the NBCOT. Praxis for speech language pathologists, and NCLEX for registered nurses. The healthcare worker certificate is something that all healthcare workers wanting to migrate to the United States must have for immigration purposes. We provide consultancy to help you get through that process as well. We also offer employer placement services, so should you need that visa sponsorship, we work with multiple employers in the US who provide H-1B and green card opportunities. Job placements will be in hospital settings, outpatient facilities, skilled nursing facilities, and sometimes home care. As I mentioned a bit earlier, you're seeing a shift away from an acute care setting in the United States because of the cost of care there is much higher. So you're seeing therapy become more in demand in these other settings as outpatient skilled nursing, rehab, and home health. IFAN has several associations. We actually are the exclusive provider for nursing staff for Vedanta. We also have the Vedanta Skills Institute for upskilling, particularly with healthcare and other professionals. And then we are a member of the AAIHR, which is the American Association for International Healthcare Recruitment. I think this is a very important piece, particularly to myself, as this demonstrates our commitment to fair and ethical recruitment practices for the United States. And what that means to you is that we are committed to making sure that we are not breaking any rules in order to get our candidates into the US, as well as the fact that we will work with employers who are working solely on a legitimate basis. You often hear bad press in the news about organizations that bring in workers under false visas or for false occupations that they aren't really trained in, and we will not participate in any of those activities. So I think that as you're looking at any body, any recruitment company, make sure that they're working with an organization that participates, such as AAIHR or the Alliance. Okay. So candidate requirements in general for physical therapy is that you have to have a professional physiotherapy degree. Naturally, that's why you're here. You need to demonstrate English language proficiency. There is an exam required that you must pass in order to qualify. This is not only a requirement for licensure, but this is a requirement for US immigration. And you need to be able to pass a background check. The reason I mention this is that there's no value to you investing in all of these programs if you're not going to be able to clear the immigration process in terms of background. So eligibility and credentials. The non-US educated PT, so foreign trained candidates, must demonstrate English language proficiency, as I mentioned, and they also must demonstrate that their education is substantially equivalent to the US academic standard. Very important, actually, as I met with your director and your vice chancellor, that they are committed to making sure that their program mirrors that to the US systems. excellent for you because it gives you an advantage in order to qualify for the U.S. more easily. Most non-U.S. educated physical therapists will lack credit hours to qualify for the U.S. In some cases, this might be because this is coursework that you had done at the secondary level, where in the U.S. we haven't, and so you need to get that on your professional transcript. In other cases, it's just a small gap of coursework that perhaps was lacking for the curriculum. So again, as your university here is continually evolving their curriculum to make sure that candidates are able to qualify without needing to go seek secondary or additional education to qualify. Now, the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, also known as the FSBPT, establishes a transcript evaluation tool, and they use this tool against your academic transcripts to identify what might be lacking and what additional coursework you would need. And then the H-1B visa itself requires that the education be equivalent to a U.S. master's degree. You may or may not know is that most of our physiotherapists from India will just have a bachelor's degree, which does qualify for the U.S. with just these additional pieces of coursework. The U.S. Department of Labor itself actually defines what the minimum educational requirement is for U.S. practice for physical therapists. So this is an excellent slide for all of you. It actually outlines all the steps that are required to basically qualify and become eligible for visa sponsorship as a physiotherapist in the U.S. The first step being is an English exam. You'll be required to take the TOEFL IBT. We'll get into a little bit later about what the minimum score requirements are. Deficiency coursework will vary again by your curriculum, but you should expect to probably have about anywhere from 2 to 5 courses that you might need to make up. NPTE review. So you all have probably heard of the National Physical Therapy Exam, the NPTE. This exam is essential for licensure. It doesn't matter which state board of physical therapy may be applying to. This is the minimum standard qualifying exam for licensure in the United States. The Type 1, which is a comprehensive tool, this is the healthcare worker certificate that will serve for not only your credentialing purposes, but also for immigration purposes for your migration. We would help assist you with a board application to get you to the proper state board for your licensing, and ultimately you may or may not work in that particular state, but it's an entry point for our candidates. You'll be required to obtain a B1 or B2 visa for the U.S. for testing. The NPTE is actually only given in the U.S. or a U.S. territory. So generally candidates from India will travel to Florida or another state in the U.S. mainland, but you can also test in Guam for this particular exam. So it does require a visa for you to travel and test. And then based on the outcome of your exam, certainly we would hope you would pass, as you then become eligible for visa filing. If in the event you would not pass your exam, we would ask that you just go back through review and then retest. Normally the retesting time is about 3 to 6 months based on how well you performed on the exam. So step 1. Step 1 is the English exam. This is the TOEFL IBT. The ETS, or Educational Testing Service, offers a internet-based TOEFL exam. Now, when I say internet-based, it is actually at an exam center, but it is a web-based exam. It's offered on a regular basis, basically every week, certainly at least a couple of times a month in most locations. And the minimum score to qualify for the Type 1 or the Visa Screen Certificate is a minimum of a 26 in speaking and an 89 overall. Now you will find that many U.S. states will have a higher standard for TOEFL. You don't necessarily need to make that higher standard in order to sit for the NPTE, but you very well may need to retest at a later time to qualify and open up more state license opportunities for you. So that higher standard actually has a breakdown of a minimum of 21 in reading, 24 in writing, 18 in listening, and speaking 26. There's no overall requirement as long as you meet those minimum scores in the other bands. Important to note is that with TOEFL, the exam scores are only good for 2 years. So FCC, which is the body, an independent body that does credentialing for physical therapists in particular for this profession, sets a coursework standard. And that standard is currently called Coursework Tool 5, CWT5. So all applicants must meet the requirement of not less than 150 semester credit hours as a prerequisite. Now this recently, it was November 2014, they changed their requirement where they no longer have a definition between professional credits and general education credits, because sometimes your coursework is falling into in those different areas. So fortunately, as long as you have the minimum of 90 professional education credits, there's no minimum on general education. So this is actually a positive, it's a big win when they made that change. Some state licensing jurisdictions will require a different standard than Coursework Tool 5. And that might again require for you to go back and do additional coursework in order to qualify for licensure in that particular state. But for the most part, the majority of the states will accept Coursework Tool 5. And Coursework Tool 5 is essential for the US visa because it does come with the Type 1 certificate. So as getting on to the Type 1 certificate itself, again, this is called the Healthcare Worker Certificate. It's required for US immigration. As part of this comprehensive credentialing review, it's twofold, the Coursework Tool 5 as well as the Type 1. It's designed to provide you with the documentation necessary to prove to immigration that you meet the qualifications of a physical therapist for the US. It also includes verification of your eligibility to practice in your country of training, as well as any other licensure you may have. So if you would work abroad for any reason, you would submit your license validations for that state. Now I understand in India you don't have national licensure. You might have a voluntary membership through IAP, and you don't necessarily need to include that as part of your application. And of course the Type 1 certificate also verifies your English language proficiency. Oh, important to note here is the Type 1 certificate itself is valid for 5 years from the date of issue. This is really important because you will deploy under your current Type 1 certificate, but if you are working in the United States for only a short period of time, you might need to renew this document. It's just a matter of really paying a fee and submitting for a renewal. Probably another very important slide to most people are what are the costs involved in this process. The TOEFL exam itself is about $200 US. These are estimated costs because there's a little variability, amongst locations and boards and so on. Deficiency coursework is going to cost you about $1,500 to $3,500 US dollars. That just depends on how much you need to do and where you need to do it. CLEP courses are rather inexpensive, but you do have to travel to take CLEP. Or alternatively, we have arrangements with some online partners that you can participate and you do make up your deficient coursework through them. There's a variety of resources to be able to achieve those. You'll have the Type 1 certificate is a rather expensive document in order for processing, but again, it's twofold. It is your credentialing as well as your visa screen certificate. That's $800. You'll have a state board application, which is your initial examination for licensure as part of your NPTE. That'll be about $200. An ATT, which is your authorization to test. This is your pass. This is your ticket in to take the NPTE exam. The Prometric Center where you will test in your U.S. territory, that will cost you $85 for registration. And then the B1 or B2 visa application will be $160. That's the current rate. And then your NPTE travel, we estimate at about $3,000. That'll just be your actual airfare and your accommodations for testing depending on where you travel. So licensure by examination. This is the NPTE, the National Physical Therapy Exam. So after you've gone through all of your credentialing process, you've applied to your state board, we will help you with setting up and arranging for you to take your NPTE. Now part of that is because you don't have a U.S. Social Security number, which is required for registration. We'll guide you to apply for an AIN or an alternate identification number. This number really is just a place filler that's required in order to identify your particular file. It's essentially an ID number. We will ask that you include a third-party authorization so IFAN can act on your behalf and inquire on your behalf. In the U.S., privacy is essential. So unless I have permission to inquire from you with an authorization on file, they won't give me any information. And then we'll ask you to complete the state board application. Again, we'll have a third-party authorization on file, and the state that you test under, as far as your board eligibility, might not necessarily be the state that you test in or the state that you ultimately will work in, but we guide you to the best states for initial licensure that's going to be the most efficient option. So the National Physical Therapy Exam, the NPTE, we offer a self-review option where we would provide you with a recommendation of coursework or material. There's a variety of material available that's constantly updated on an annual basis. So we would give you which sources that you should turn to in order to study for this exam. There are some online options available to you, but again, this is still going to be some self-study for you. We'll also help you with the visa and travel arrangements, guide you in terms of your visa application and what destination you should travel to or may be interested in traveling to based on your personal circumstances. Now, the exam itself is 200 questions, and you are given 5.5 hours to take it. So it's a pretty serious exam. It is just a pass-fail. So there is a minimum standard. You just need to meet the minimum standard. There are no extra points or no extra favor if you score well beyond or well above the standard, as long as you meet the minimum. Nobody in your lifetime will ever ask you what you scored on NPTE as you're treating. Okay? So I know people get a little hung up on, what did you score, what did you score? As long as you pass, that's really all that matters. Now, unofficial results, as far as the pass-fail, those scores are available after 1 week, but your official score breakdown will be available about 10 days later. There's a lot of information on this slide, but essentially this is the content of the NPTE exam. It's broken down into 4 areas: PT examination, foundations for evaluation, differential diagnosis and prognosis, interventions, and non-systems domain. Non-systems domain tends to be the weakest area for foreign trained candidates because there's a lot of US specific information. You're in a very good university here, so they will work with you in terms of the equipment. You have access probably to a lot better equipment and technology than you may have at another university. So I'm sure you all will do very well in this particular area, but particularly as we get into regulatory bodies and things that are very US specific, this will be an area that you would need to put a lot of focus on. The reason I have 600 plus here is that's the minimum score for passing. The questions you can see are weighted as far as how they add up. And you can actually technically fail one area and have less than a 600 and still pass the overall exam if you do well in one of the other content areas. So once you finally clear your NPTE, you're eligible for a US visa. That's great news. We actually work with a few different employer options in the United States. For the most part, the visa option available for physical therapists is going to be an H-1B. There are 2 different types of H-1B. There's a cap and a non-cap. We work with an employer who has both options, a cap and a non-cap option available. The difference between those being is that a cap H-1B option is just one time a year. Every April 1st, the U.S. Immigration will open up what they call a lottery system and allow any employer to file who can prove a demonstrated need for physical therapy or any other healthcare profession or IT profession that's eligible for H-1B sponsorship. And then you have the non-cap option. This is very advantageous, but it's kind of rare because non-cap options are available only to nonprofit organizations or those engaged in research, and they have to prove, they have a higher level of scrutiny of why they should be eligible. So we generally will try to drive people towards a cap option initially, but depending on the time of the year that they're passing their exam, we'll also look at non-cap opportunities. Now, another option available for a visa is a permanent resident card, or also commonly known as a green card. Under the employers that we work with, you can come into the U.S. on an H-1B and at the same time have a green card application process. This is particularly good news for you because an H-1B is exclusively a work permit. It's tied to a specific employer. It does have a limitation on validity, but if you have a green card application in process with that employer, you can extend your work authorization through them until your green card becomes available to you. There is a backlog, so candidates especially from India or born in India have a backlog of about 8 years right now for their green cards. So the option to convert to green card is really actually a very good option for you, because if you have this approval in process, you can maintain continuous work. We talk a little bit here about the cap and the non-cap. How this all starts is you're an NPTE pass candidate, and an employer files what's called an I-129 filing. So this is a petition to hire a foreign trained worker. Now, 3 things will happen with this petition. It'll either be approved straight off, it'll be perhaps denied for some reason, you'll get a reason for denial, or you might receive what's called a request for evidence, or an RFE. And the RFE, I'll get into that first because that can be a little complicated for some people. This might be a request for documentation on your part. They might want a copy of your visa screen certificate. They might want something from you as an individual. Contrarily, they might also want something from the employer. They want to prove they want the employer to prove why they need to hire a foreign trained worker. So it may or may not be on you or the employer. What happens with an RFE is that you just basically return what they're asking for, and then that process kind of starts over. You either receive an approval, a denial, or another RFE. In most cases, I would say it receives an approval at that point, because it's often something as just providing a copy of your visa screen certificate. But if there is a denial, then we would go back to a filing process again. So you don't necessarily have to be under that one particular employer. They would just file a different petition. Unfortunately, there's just no rhyme or reason behind sometimes why it can be denied on the first time, but then approved on the second time. That's just immigration and the case manager who receives that file. In a best case scenario is that you receive an approval notice straight off, and then what will happen is an embassy interview or consulate interview is scheduled right away. With H-1Bs in particular, the timing of this is actually rather quick. You'll receive an approval notice, and an interview is scheduled typically within about 6 weeks. So what can happen at the embassy interview or the consulate interview is that you're going to have 2 options. Your visa will be issued, you'll be approved, you'll leave your passport with them for stamping, they return it to you a few days later. That's the best case scenario. What happens sometimes is a 221G is issued. And this would be something similar to a request for evidence, but at the embassy level. We want you to provide, again, the visa screen certificate, we want you to provide a copy of your NPTE pass letter, some other piece of documentation. Nobody ever gets stopped at a 221G. It's just a matter of resolving it, providing whatever piece of documentation they want, and then submitting it, and it goes on to an approval process. So once your visa is issued for our employers, typically they will deploy you in about 2 to 4 weeks after your visa stamp is in your passport. You arrange your deployment with them, you deploy to their corporate office, attend an orientation, and basically you have legal status in the United States. So our U.S. employer options. We have, again, H-1B, cap and cap exempt options, and green card. All of our employers who work with the H-1B will also file the green card, so you know that you'll have that continuity through them. They all provide what's called a prevailing wage. So you would receive a contract from our employer, and that contract might say you're going to make specifically $31 an hour. Really what that means to you is that's a minimum pay rate. Pay rates in the United States will vary just based on the cost of living of the location that you're living in. So what a wage assessment is done on that particular job location, whatever they demonstrate as being in the 25th percentile of the wage for that location is considered a prevailing wage, and that would be your salary at that particular job. All of our employers, and standard in the U.S., whether you're in healthcare or any other type of industry, you'll have a comprehensive benefits package including medical and dental, life insurance, disability plans, and so on. Vacation time, which we refer to as paid time off, 401k, retirement planning contributions, annual salary increases, so you do receive incremental increases as you're working. Continuing education, very important for your license renewals, and all of our employers are invested in wanting to make sure that you stay fresh and current with all the changes in the industry and the profession, so they will pay for your continuing education, as well as any license endorsements to other states that you might go to work in. Professional liability insurance is very important. All of our employers will provide that to all of their candidates. I actually don't know if that's a standard here in India. We're a very litigious society in the United States, so you want to make sure that in the event that a patient would sue for any reason, that you have coverage for yourself and the employer provides this for you. The employers also provide housing and relocation assistance. So that means your deployment to the United States, your housing while you're in your orientation, and then your deployment to your actual assignment location. Interesting enough, as many times as I've given presentations in my career, not a lot of people know about the US. You might know California, you might know Florida, New York, and there's a lot in between. The reason I like this slide in particular is I have found many candidates find true happiness in places that they have never heard of before they relocated to the US. We'll have candidates working in, honestly, probably just about every one of these states except Hawaii. Texas right now is a great opportunity. Every client I work with has placements in Texas. It's a very big state, it's a very diverse state. It's a state that actually does not have any state income taxes, so that's appealing. And I think what I would like to stress for people is don't get so fixated on a particular city for migration, but look for a lifestyle. If you're looking for a warm climate, if you're looking for an urban setting, you want a rural setting, you want suburbia, whatever it is that you're looking for as part of your American dream, just be a little open-minded. Now, under our employers, these are the deployment requirements that you would need to have. None of these will really come up as anything typically challenging for you. You will have immunizations and titers. There's a big shift in the United States to having titers on file instead of immunization records. These are a requirement for Joint Commission, for the facilities. You'll have a medical for U.S. immigration that you'll have done as well. Reason being is titers are going to show your immunity, whereas an immunization you may have had it, but it doesn't necessarily show that you're immune. Oh, thank you. The TB screening, interesting enough, as an American and working with foreign training healthcare professionals, TB is actually a problem in the United States that we don't have BCG vaccinations. So you'll be required to do annual TB screening as well as a chest x-ray. You'll also be required to have an annual fitness for duty. And all that is to say that you are free of any communicable diseases and are fit to work as a healthcare professional. You'll be required to also carry with you sealed university transcripts. So once you graduate, get some copies of that, make sure they're sealed. The reason for this is this will help you in your license endorsements later on in your career. On a personal level, you'll be required to get a police clearance from every country that you have lived in for at least 6 months since you were 16 years old. International driver's license is very important. The reason being is that our public transportation in the United States is terrible. You will need to learn how to drive if you don't know how to. You'll also need to buy a vehicle. We work with employers who, with companies who will offer the option to arrange the purchase of a new vehicle that would be available for you upon your deployment. You receive a new car. We also work with lenders that'll help you with used car or secondhand car financing. So for your arrival in the U.S., again, these are our employers if we work with your sponsorship. IFAN will pay for your relocation airfare to the U.S. We provide you with the company provides you with transportation to get to your assigned housing, as well as to your assignment location. You will have shared housing upon your deployment, so you'll go through a 1-month orientation with the client. You'll learn all sorts of things in terms of clinical and social acclimation, applying for the U.S. Social Security number, bank accounts, cell phones, all the things that you need to do to settle into your new life in the U.S. You'll go for driving lessons if you don't know how to drive. You'll have a driving assessment just to make sure that you will qualify for your driver's license as soon as you do arrive. You'll have other new employee paperwork in terms of your tax information and emergency contact information and all the things that as an employer we need to have on file for you, as well as attend your BLS certification course. In the U.S., the American Heart Association is the standard. even if you have it from home, you will still be asked to do it, and you'll just do it as part of a group in your orientation. And then you'll learn, in particular, very important is documentation. Again, I mentioned U.S. is a very litigious society. Documentation is essential. You document everything you do in your regular day with your patients. And then they'll teach you about the electronic charting systems that are used by the facilities you're going to be working at. So with that, does anyone have any questions?
Ma'am, what is GPA?
The GPA?
Yes, ma'am.
There's no minimum requirement, as long as you have passed.